A Toad for Tuesday by Russell E. Erickson. On a windy, wintry night, as countless stars were shining bright, deep in the ground, far under the snow, two little toads were having an argument. The two toads lived by themselves in their cozy home. Wharton did the cleaning and Morton did the cooking. Both did their jobs well, and it was, in fact, Morton's marvelous cooking that had started the argument. After finishing a huge supper, they settled back to enjoy dessert. As Morton poured a cup of clover blossom tea, Wharton said, "This is the finest pita brittle I've ever eaten." "Thank you," Morton replied. Then Wharton said, "I'll bet dear old Aunt Julia would surely love some." "She certainly would," agreed Morton. Wharton said, "I'm going to put some in a box and take it to her this week." At that, Morton spilled his hot tea all over himself and jumped so high he bounced off the ceiling. "Why, that's the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard," he sputtered. "Why?" said Wharton. "Because," said Morton, "it is winter up there." He pointed towards the crack in the ceiling he had just made. "And it is cold up there, and there is snow up there, but there is one thing you will not find up there, and that's another toad." When he saw how long Wharton's face had grown, he was sorry he had spoken so harshly. "Wharton," he said, "it's very kind of you to think of it, and it will be a fine idea except for two things. First, you would freeze, and second, you would not be able to hop through all that deep snow." Wharton sighed, clasped his fingers, and leaned far back. Morton could see that he was beginning to think. Whenever Wharton thought about something, he blinked his eyes, one at a time. They began to blink now, slowly at first, then faster, and then faster, and even faster, until suddenly a big grin appeared on his face. "I know how I shall do it," he cried. "And how is that?" asked Morton. "Well, so that I don't freeze, I'll wear 4 of my heaviest coats, 3 of my most tightly knit sweaters, 2 pair of my thickest mittens, and my warm cap with the ear flaps. And to go through the snow, I'll make some skis." "Skis? What are skis?" said Morton. "Something a traveling rabbit told me about last summer, and I know just how to make them." Morton's jaw dropped open, but he didn't say a word. He knew that once Wharton's mind was made up, there was no changing it. For the next 3 days, Wharton worked very hard. He made his skis from strong oak tree roots. When he was done, they were as handsome a pair of skis as anyone could want. They were sturdy and straight and polished, to such a smoothness they felt like silk. He had also made ski poles to push with from porcupine quills and salamander leather. On Wednesday morning, he was ready to leave for Aunt Julia's. It took quite a while to bundle up in all his warm clothes. The last thing he put on was a little pack Morton had made for him. In it were several lunches, for it would be at least 3 or 4 days' travel to Aunt Julia's home. There were also a few other things which Wharton thought he might need, such as an extra pair of mittens and furry slippers. And on the bottom was the box of pita brittle for Aunt Julia. He said goodbye to his brother, who was already washing the breakfast dishes. "Goodbye," said Morton, "and be very, very careful." Wharton started up through the long tunnel that led to the top of the old stump they lived under. When he stepped out, he was dazzled. The brilliant snow glistened and glittered, and the deep blue sky was filled with puffy white clouds that drifted over the tall evergreens. Snowbirds twittered gaily as they hopped from branch to branch. "This is positively beautiful," thought Wharton, "but I must be going. It's a long way to Aunt Julia's, and I'm curious to try my new skis." He reached down and strapped them on and gave them a strong push. Immediately the skis became tangled, sending him tumbling into a hill of snow. He hopped up quickly and tried again. This time he went much farther, until he ran straight into a squirrel who was digging in the snow. Once again he hopped up, and after apologizing, off he went again. Now he was going along quite well. The more he skied, the more he enjoyed it. All bundled up in his 4 coats, 3 sweaters, 2 pairs of mittens, and his cap with the ear flaps, the little toad looked like a tiny ball skimming over the woodland snow. After he had gone quite a way, and when the sun was directly overhead, he decided to have some lunch. He saw a perfect place to eat, a large flat stump sticking out of the snow. Stepping out of his skis and giving a big jump, he landed on top. He brought out one of his lunches and poured some hot acorn tea. He ate 2 sandwiches and was just about to bite into a slice of mosquito pie when he heard a strange sound. It sounded very much like a far-off hiccup. Wharton looked around, but he saw nothing. He started to take another bite, and again he heard it. This time it seemed to come from below the stump. He hopped over to the edge and cautiously peeked down. There, sticking out of the snow, were 2 furry brown legs with tiny white feet and little toes that wiggled and jiggled every time the hiccup was heard. Wharton hopped down and began clearing away the snow as fast as he could. When he was done, he found that he had uncovered a brown and white furred deer mouse. His big dark mouse eyes were filled with gratitude. "Oh, thank you," the mouse said with relief. "That was, eek, most uncomfortable. It seems that whenever I become upside down I get the hiccups. I was afraid I would remain that way till the snow melts in the spring." "How did you manage to get stuck upside down?" asked Wharton with a blink. "I was on top of the stump having a little snooze in the noon sun, as I often do, but this time I had a dream that I was a merry-go-round, and before I could wake up I rolled right off the edge of the stump." "I think I have just the thing for you," Wharton said, "if you will hop back up with me." When they did, Wharton gave the mouse some hot tea, and right away the hiccups disappeared. "Thank you again," said the mouse. "That's much better." "You're very welcome," said Wharton. "Do you live near here, by the way?" "As near as can be," said the mouse. "I live in this stump, and if I may ask, what is a toad like you doing out in the winter time?" Wharton told him about the beetle bridle for Aunt Julia and how he was traveling on skis. The mouse thought it was a fine idea, but when Wharton pointed in the direction in which he was going, the mouse's eyes opened wide in dismay. "Oh, you mustn't go through the wooded valley," he cried. "Why?" asked Wharton with a blink. The mouse leaned closer. "Because there is a certain owl who lives there," he said in a whisper. "Of all the owls in the world, I'm sure that that one is the meanest and nastiest of them all. He's so sneaky that he hunts in the daytime when other owls sleep." "But," said Wharton, "I'll have to go through that valley, for if I go any other way I'll surely get lost. But don't worry," he said with a confident smile. "With my new skis I'll dash through that valley so fast the owl will never catch me." "Then you wait here a moment," said the mouse, and he scampered down the side of the stump and disappeared into a hole. When he returned he had a round box with him. Out of it he took a small scarf. It was colored a most unusual and pretty red. "If you will wear this, all of my relatives who live along the way will know that you are a friend of mine, and if you should get into trouble they will help you in any way they can." The toad wrapped the scarf tightly around his neck, and they bid each other farewell. With a quick push, off he went. Swiftly he sped down the hillside, on and on, until he entered the dark woods at the edge of the valley. The little toad sailed between the trees. He darted under the bushes. He streaked past the rocks. Like a tiny rocket, he swept along the valley. Just when he was almost through, he noticed a dark shadow on the snow, a shadow that was racing right along beside him. Nervously he looked up, hoping with all his heart that it wouldn't be what he knew it must be. But it was. Gliding silently on broad wings just above his head, the owl peered down at him through enormous yellow eyes. He seemed to float through the air with no effort at all. The terrified toad could hardly take his eyes away. When he did, it was too late. A wall of old stones were suddenly in front of him. He tried to turn, but there was not enough time. Into the wall he crashed. He popped out of his skis and rolled and tumbled along the wall until he stopped in a heap. When he brushed the snow from his eyes, the owl was standing on a log staring at him. "Do I see a toad under all that clothing?" said the owl. "Yes, you do," said Warden. "In the middle of winter? I'm going to visit my Aunt Julia." "Well, now you are going to visit me," said the owl. "Until next Tuesday, that is." Warden tried to hop away, but one foot hurt so badly he couldn't move. The owl came closer, walking very slowly. Warden closed his eyes. As he did, he thought he heard a whisper. He looked around only to see that the chill wind was blowing small puffs of snow through holes in the stone wall, and he knew that no one was there at all. Then strong claws wrapped around him. He heard the soft flapping of wings, and he felt the air of the deep woods grow cold as he was lifted into the sky. Warden found himself being whisked over the tops of the trees. The evergreens below had the appearance of a thick carpet. The owl traveled fast and silently. The winter sun was far down when Warden noticed that they were heading towards a particularly large spreading oak. The owl swooped through its snarly branches and into a hole near the top. It was dark inside and smelled musty. The owl sat the toad in a corner and stepped back. He gave him a piercing look. "What's your name?" he said. "Warden." "Warden," said the owl. "Well, I think I'll call you Warty. I don't care for that very much." "You don't? Well, that's too bad, Warty." The little toad got up all his courage and looked right at the owl. Are you going to eat me?" The owl opened his yellow eyes wide. "Am I going to eat you? Of course I'm going to eat you." Then the owl walked across the room. On the wall, a large calendar hung crookedly. The owl pointed at it. "Do you know what this says?" The toad looked at it closely. "Yes, it says, 'Bernie's Garage, brakes and front ends are specialty.'" "No, I don't mean that. You're not very bright, are you? It says that in 5 days it will be next Tuesday. And next Tuesday happens to be my birthday. And finding a little toad in the middle of winter is going to make me a special birthday treat. So until that day, Warty, you may do as you please. From the looks of your foot, I needn't worry about your trying to hop away. Besides, there's no way you can possibly get down from this tree." The toad looked at his foot. It was twice its normal size. He gave a big sigh. Then he glanced around. "Tell me, Warty," said the owl, "what do you think of my home?" Warden looked around again, then he sniffed, then he blinked. "Well," said the owl. "It's terrible," said the toad. "I would certainly hate to live here." "Don't worry," said the owl. "You aren't going to for long." "As long as I'm here, I would like to make myself comfortable," said Warden. "Do you mind if I light some candles? It seems very dreary in here." "Dreary?" said the owl. "It seems dreary? Well, go ahead if you want to. It doesn't matter to me." The toad dug into his pack and pulled out 2 beeswax candles. As soon as they were lit and began casting their warm glow about the room, he felt much better. He began to straighten his corner, and being of a cheerful nature, he began to hum a little tune. The owl couldn't believe his ears. "Warty, you did hear me say that I was going to eat you next Tuesday, didn't you?" "Yes," said the toad. The owl shook his head. Warden continued to busy himself in his corner. Then he turned to the owl and said, "What's your name?" "I don't know," said the owl. "I guess I don't have one." "What do your friends call you?" "I don't have any friends." "That's too bad," said Warden. "No, it isn't too bad," snapped the owl, "because I don't want any friends and I don't need any friends. Now be quiet." Warden nodded. After a while he said, "If you did have a name, what would you like it to be?" The owl began to be a little flustered. He wasn't used to talking to anyone, especially in his home. "Well, if I had a name," he said slowly. If I had a name, I think I would like George." "Uh-huh," said the toad. He went back to straightening his corner. The owl was becoming sleepy. He fluffed his feathers and closed his eyes. Just as he was beginning to doze off, the toad called, "Hey, George!" The owl's eyes popped open. "Are you talking to me?" "Yes," said the toad. "Do you mind if I make some tea?" "Oh, go ahead," said the flabbergasted owl. Wharton took some more things out of his pack and prepared the tea. While he waited for it to brew, he slipped on his furry slippers and wrapped his favorite woolly bath robe around himself. Shortly, he had a steaming pot of refreshing tea. "It's ready, George," said the toad. "What's ready?" growled the sleepy owl. "Our tea." "I don't want any." "But I've already got it poured," said Wharton. "All right," grumbled the owl. Then, by the light of the beeswax candles, the owl and the toad sat down to tea. "May I tell you something?" said Wharton. "What?" said the owl. "When we were coming here today, even though I was scared as could be, I enjoyed going through the air like that. It must be wonderful to be able to fly wherever you want to." "Why, yes, it is. It's just fine, I'll tell you, Warty. Sometimes there's nothing I enjoy more than flying as high as I can and then just drifting along very slowly as I look down and everything, although it can be dangerous if you're not careful." He told the toad about the time when he was caught in the dark, rolling clouds of a thunderstorm, and how he was tossed about for hours amid hailstones and crackling streaks of lightning. Wharton was fascinated by the story. "Would you care for another cup of tea, George?" The owl looked down at his empty cup. "I suppose I might as well," he said. As Wharton poured, he said, "That's quite sly of you, George, flying about during the day like that when all other owls are sleeping." "Is that so?" snorted the owl. "Well, it so happens that I just can't stay awake all night. The last time I tried I fell asleep on my way home and I flew straight into the biggest beehive I've ever saw in my life." The owl shuddered as he remembered the night. Wharton chuckled. Then the owl talked further and the toad listened. Then the toad talked and the owl listened. It wasn't until the latest hours of that night when the owl finally said, "I'm too tired to talk any more," and he went to sleep. Wharton put away the teacups and then he put out the beeswax candles. As he lay in the still darkness, he tried very hard to think of what he should do. But because of the very busy day he had had, and because of all the new experiences, his tired head just would not work at all. He was soon snoring softly. This is the end of part 1. Part 2 coming soon. So, stay tuned, you guys. Bye.